Hey everybody, how's it going? So for today's video, I really want to talk about my long-term review of the GFX 100S Mark II. I've owned the GFX 100S Mark II for a little over a year now. The camera has been everywhere with me, from travels to Japan, Italy, from portrait sessions, creative sessions, and even paid work, weddings and whatnot. And I do a lot of street and landscape photography with it. Long-term use of the GFX camera and just medium format in general, I can't ever see myself giving up on the system. The images and everything that comes out of the camera, it's the best of the best. You can't ask for any more than like a medium format camera from Fuji or even Hasselblad, right? Those are the two that are quite affordable per se for most consumers, including me. And I think you can't go wrong with the GFX 100S Mark II or just medium format cameras in general. This has been my main camera for majority of my creative and paid work. Big medium format sensor gives me so much flexibility when editing raw files, especially in how it handles details, highlights, and shadows. The brutal 100 megapixel sensor gives me the flexibility of cropping and reframing a lot of my photos, and it really does help me in a long run because I don't have the fear of cropping too much to the point where I'm losing details of the subject or the thing that I'm trying to portray or trying to capture. One of the things I love about the GFX RAW files is that if you were to shoot a photo underexposed by 2 or 3 stops, right? Maybe for our artistic reasoning, or maybe you're just in a venue that's really bad lighting, the GFX has you covered because of the fact that the sensor is so much bigger than the full frame sensor. You can crank up the ISO, or you can just push it up to the appropriate exposure in post, and it's crazy because the amount of details, the sharpness, and even with you're pushing above 2 or 3 stops in post, you still keep a lot of the details in the photos, and there's barely any noise. And if there is noise, the noise is actually quite pleasant because it is your typical chroma color digital noise. It's just that film grain, which Fuji film is well known for when it comes to how they handle the high ISOs and just noise in general, because their noise, their grain looks so well to the point where you kind of go with it because it looks so good in photos, right? It kind of is reminiscent to film photos. As a wedding photographer, I need to always be on my toes to catch those special moments between the couples, the family, and friends. Even though the GFX is compared to other cameras like full frame or crop sensor, is much slower, but man, when it lands the shot, the images come out so beautiful, and I can't get over how much the images look so good straight out of the camera, and you can barely do any edits, which is kind of insane to me because of the fact that with the bigger sensor, it's able to collect more data for colors, the details, the sharpness, and just the overall look and feel to it. For example, I'll say Sony and the GM Master lens, right? They're very sharp. Too sharp to my liking, sharp to the point where it looks too fake, too digital, right? It doesn't mimic what we see in real life, right? Because I highly doubt all of us would see everything around us, your pets, your friends, the things you're looking at are sharpness 100 plus, right? Whereas it's too unnatural. I mean, with the medium format and the combination of using sharp native lens, yes, it's sharp, but I think it's because of the fact that the medium format sensor is so much bigger than the full frame. Not only does it able to have sharp images, but there's more details on the sharpness being captured, making it a lot more natural to the eye, which is something very pleasing that I can't can't get over with the medium format camera from Fuji or any other medium format cameras. And then the great thing about with the sharpness of, you know, if you use like a native lens, like a 55mm 1.7 or 80mm 1.7, right? Those lenses are clinically sharp, but when I say clinically sharp, it's a little different from being clinically sharp on a medium format versus, you know, like mainly use the 55 and the 80mm native GFX lens. Those are the two prime lenses that I always have with me at any given time, because of the fact that they're both at 1.7, and they probably are the best native lens for the GFX 100S Mark II. The focus could be better. I think in terms of how the GFX focuses, like it's not blazing fast, right? I'm still able to land maybe 7-8 out of my 10 shots I capture on my wedding days, which is more than enough. And I always do have like second camera with me, like a full frame, like a Nikon Z8 or a Lumix S1RII to capture more of like the fast pace of the wedding day, right? Which is perfectly fine. But that being said, though, with the images, though, I can't complain, though, because like so far, in my opinion, and my experience, that it's able to land all the shots I need for my clients and for myself, and I have no complaints about that. And the images come out absolutely beautiful. And again, like I don't think using a medium format camera, which is, you know, much slower than your typical full frame, right, or a crop sensor, it isn't going to be for everyone, which I completely get it, right? It took me a while to adjust to the slowness of the Fuji GFX, but it taught me something very, very important, is to like always anticipate things that may happen with your client, right? Like for example, staying on my toes just to like look out for my, you know, the bride or the groom just interacting with each other, or even interacting with their guests or friends, right? And those are the key moments that kind of taught me to be more patient with my photos and just really predict ahead of time. And it kind of paved way for me to become a better wedding photographer, and which is good because like the tools again are there to make your job easier, right? But I also firmly believe that the tools that you have also teaches you to overcome the shortcomings of that said tool, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just builds upon your experience and your skill set. And I am forever ever glad that having a GFX like this taught me that way for a lot of my wedding work. On top of that, imagine you're working at a wedding venue that have really bad lighting. Like typically, you know, usually happens in receptions, sometimes in ceremonies, depending what it is. Like lighting could be bad in terms of like there's no actual natural lighting coming in, or maybe they're so far away from where like most of the lights are. And I try not to use flash if I can, because like I'm not a fan of it. Other than you know, for reception purposes, aside from using flash for receptions like late in the night, which is understandable because, you know, it's too dark, you kind of need flash for that. But overall though, I try to stick to using natural lighting, and this is where the GFX comes into play. And this is where it really shines, is because of the fact that you can bump the ISO so high, like above 6400. Sometimes I've done 10,000, and the images look great. There's no chroma color digital noise you typically see on other cameras. There's grain and noise in there, but it's pleasing to the eye to the point where like it kind of fits the vibe of the photos, and it worked out for me, right? And just like the flexibility between like having more lighting, or not more lighting, more exposure to the sensor, because the sensor is much bigger than a full frame. That's like a A+ for me for those kind of situations. Now portraits, I am a lover of like creative portrait sessions. I started off doing portraits and still do, because that is more of my creative side, and that's where I have the most fun. So with the GFX though, this is where it shines the most for me. It's because of the fact that It's seriously built for this because, again, like I mentioned earlier, that you have so much flexibility on the raw files in terms of like how much exposure or how much you can push the colors, the highlights, shadows, blacks, and it will all look so beautiful because the flexibility behind it is just like what you see in real life is what you see in the camera too. Like, sure, it is a pain to edit 100 megapixel files because one is that I think they're about 200 megs per photo, and that can add up quite a bit. So let's say on a typical like portrait session, I take 600 photos, right? Or maybe less. So 600 or something like that times 200 megs, that's like 60 gigs. That's quite a bit. And on top of that, I edit all my photos on Windows, and Adobe Lightroom is complete trash. It's not an optimized software. It takes a long time to apply like my edits, masking, framing, all like those little things. Even with my, top of the line setup, using the 9950 X3D, right? One of the best like working CPU and for gaming, it has a hard time juggling all those huge files. I do spend quite a bit typically just working on one file because it takes so long. But the way that the images come out though, it's so worth it. You strictly use natural lighting, and that could be a good or bad thing depending of who you're asking. But with me, I'm more focused on natural lighting because I want it to look more natural. So I tend to shoot a lot of my creative sessions out in the outdoors or in studio with like big windows and whatnot. Kind of helps me better compose all my lighting and whatnot and framing. And regardless, if I was shooting in a bad lighting in a studio, right, I can crank up the ISO like I mentioned earlier, and the images will look pristine, no issues, it's kind of crazy. And for outdoors though, because the fact that, let's say, I was shooting in a broad daylight, middle of the afternoon, and there's a lot of sun that's directly beaming on me and the subject, right? The great thing about medium format that is that I can recover a lot of the highlights and shadows with no apparent issues. So let's say broad daylight, I have to underexpose by 2 or 3 so I can save the highlights in the sky and the skin. Then I can just bring the shadows back, right, and the contrast, and bam, the image looks perfect, pristine, clean, right? So I never had issues with that, even with different cameras. But with the GFX, it kind of makes it a lot easier to recover and save my highlights and my shadows, right? And it's a done deal for me because it's such a good camera for the stuff I do. On top of that, with the nature of having a creative session, normally it isn't fast paced. I'm not shooting fast action. It's mainly just a slower paced kind of like approach. So combining that and with the GFX, right, because it takes a bit of time to take a photo with the GFX, it kind of creates a wonderful experience using it, because I can take my time and frame my shots the way I want it, and it really helps me step back and think what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to show my audience, what I'm trying to show my clients, or maybe even like what I'm trying to achieve with this session with my friend or the model or a team of people that I've hired. And of course, being a Fujifilm camera, the Fujifilm color science is so good. Worked with Canon files, Sony files, Nikon files, Lumix files. If I had to rate it in terms of preference, I would put GFX colors on top. Then I would put maybe Lumix files on second, then Nikon third. Oh, actually, you know what? Maybe Nikon and Lumix are pretty much neck and neck for second place. And I'll put like Canon third and Sony fourth, because I'm not a fan of Sony files at all, because I just don't like the skin tones and the weird green tints on the skin. So travel and landscape photography. So one thing is that I don't think it isn't for anybody who's willing to lug around 2 or 3 pounds of like camera gear with them when they're traveling, especially when you're just doing a lot of walking, you know, in Japan, Italy, or London, or anywhere in the world. I don't think that's for everybody, but for me, that's not a problem because I know exactly what I'm gonna get out of the Fujifilm GFX if I were to bring it with me for my travels and for landscape. Again, there is no brainer for me, right? The combination of the big sensor and the 100 megapixel on top of that, it gives you all the great requirements to be able to capture all the things that you really need for landscape and portraits. Oh, sorry, for landscape and travels. For example, right? I've been to Italy in my other video somewhere up here. I brought it with me. I was using the Mamiya 45mm 2.8, and that's the only lens I brought for that trip. And it's great because that's the 35mm full frame equivalent. I do understand that it's not wide enough for landscape, and also it's not tight enough for landscape, right? But I think it's a great in between, because if I want to have like if I want to crop into my photos for certain mountain peaks or things I see, I can just crop it, right? Because the fact that it's a 100 megapixel sensor. So you cropping in your photos for landscape, you can keep all the details and not lose any of them, and the sharpness will still be there. You can't go wrong with that. And I had a pleasure taking it with me to Italy, in the Dolomites, in Rome, with the GFX. The way it renders scenes are just on another level. There's a depth and dimensions to the files you don't really get with smaller sensors. As you see, all the photos I showed you, right? Those are all the GFX, either with the 55mm, 80mm. The Mamiya 45, the Mamiya 80mm. Those are all the photos I curated over the past year since I've owned the GFX, and it has done me no wrong. If I could, it's gonna be so hard for me to name one negative thing about it, and I can't right now, or maybe I can by making it up. But I wish that the GFX had a CF Express card slot instead of an SD card. Having a CF Express Type B slot makes a lot more sense, because just the nature of how big these files are, and I would appreciate a much faster read and write out speed on the camera. If you know exactly what you're getting yourself into, then you will mold well with the system, because having that correct mindset going in, it would make a very more enjoyable experience for you, which it has been for me. So I have zero complaints other than I just want a faster readout and write speed to my cards, so that way I can keep spamming photos. And yeah, the pricing could be a little bit expensive, but I think that's the way it is with these cameras anyway. They're pretty affordable compared to other like medium format cameras like Hasselblad, or even the Phase 1. Like, I kind of wish I had a Phase 1, but I don't have that kind of money to go and buy one anyway. But yeah, guys, I hope this was enjoyable, and this is just my take, my review, my experience with it. Again, I don't do any technical reviews. I'm that kind of guy. I'm more of like, I take it, use it for what I need to do, what I want to do, and that's it. And just giving you my experience about it. Other than that, thanks. Cheers.